All right, welcome everybody to Adulting 101. This is part of our new grad series for our graduating students. Thank you all for attending tonight. My name is Tyler Pengraft. I am the Assistant Director of Student Engagement and Philanthropy in the Alumni Office at UC San Diego. Before we get started, I would like to point out just a couple of things about the virtual room that we are in at the moment. You are able to submit questions via the Q&A box. Please submit your questions via the Q&A box, not the chat box, so I can make sure that I get to everybody. When you do submit your questions via the Q&A box, it would be very helpful if you could list the topic specifically that you're asking questions about. And then also you are welcome to submit a question throughout the entire webinar. If it's appropriate, we may address the question in a moment, or we may wait until the end when we are able to get to all the questions at once. It just depends on the timing of the question and the flow of the conversation. Without further ado, I would like to ask our guests today to introduce themselves. Sarah, if you would like to start, that would be great.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in. My name is Sarah Montoya. I'm a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley. I graduated UCSD in 2011 and have stayed in contact with the university ever since. Actually, I moved to Houston shortly after I graduated, started my career there. And then when I moved back to LA a couple years later, I re-engaged with the university and the alumni coordinator for that area and have been in contact ever since. And I'm really happy to be here and to share any advice that is hopefully helpful to you as you prepare to launch into the next chapter of your lives, which is the rest of your working life. I'm happy to be a resource to anybody ongoing. So feel free to reach out to me. I think you have a direct path to my contact info. So I'm happy to help anybody who has follow-up questions as well.
Wonderful. So everyone, hello. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Deborah Lynn. I'm currently the Senior Associate Director of Corporate Foundation and Association Relations, so mouthful, at Stanford Medicine. So my background is twofold. When I graduated from UCSD in 2008 with a biology degree, I entered actually the entertainment industry in film and television. So I did that for a number of years on the biz dev side, marketing, global partnerships, as well as talent management, and then pivoted over to higher education for UCLA, doing similar work as today's panel, career development, career engagement, and preparedness. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. All right, so I want to get started by acknowledging our current moments. There's obviously so much going on in the world today. Before we even, had COVID, I think that a lot of students had anxiety about what to do once they graduated. How do they take care of themselves? How do they make a living? Now that seems to be an even more pressing concern as we're looking at something like 20% unemployment across the United States. A lot of students are graduating into this economy. And I know that both of you had started your careers in the aftermath, of the 08-09 recession. So I'm wondering if you would be able to speak to that, what your experience was looking for a job, any takeaways that you can share with any of the students here today. Deborah, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, so I graduated right in the middle of the crisis, right, in 2008. And I was very fortunate in the sense that I started looking for a job followed my senior year. So I had already some targets that I had planned out for 6 to 9 months prior. But yeah, it was a really tough time. Most of my friends didn't have jobs when they graduated. I had an offer, and it was at Disney. My job was funded by the diversity and inclusion budget. It was a way of introducing different types of people with different backgrounds, not traditional to the industry, to come in and join the industry. But I think I was very fortunate to have looked ahead, but also to, as I was transitioning, managing my expectations and also changing those expectations as things continue to unfold.
Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly is no easy answer. It was a challenging landscape when I graduated college as well. I am a first generation born in America of immigrant parents. I had to work for money my whole life. So, you know, in college, I didn't have the opportunity that many of my friends had at internships that could then turn into jobs. I was, you know, working entry level positions just to be able to put myself through school. And then I graduated and I had a hefty student loan bill that was coming knocking. And I had to take care of myself, and I had to take care of bills and real life expenses that were you know, I went to school with the idea that I was going to graduate and be able to get work. I had to go make good on that because the world wasn't going to do it for me. The landscape as I looked around San Diego when I graduated was folks who had internships were maybe getting jobs, maybe if their parents knew someone, they were getting jobs. But outside of that, folks were going to grad school just to kind of buy time, still not really knowing what they necessarily wanted to do, but more school. I couldn't afford that. Moving in with mom and dad while I figured it out, that wasn't an option for me. So I moved to a place I researched, and I found that Houston, Texas, which is not the most attractive of names of cities out there in the world, but had an affordable cost of living for a decent lifestyle and had jobs. So I moved to Houston. I didn't know anybody. I just knew that there was an opportunity to work and an opportunity to earn a starting wage and support myself. So I moved there. I got a job while I looked for jobs, just to pay rent while I looked around. And then I aggressively just applied at every big company that I could, just a top firm, whatever I could find. And about 2 pay periods later, with my in-between job that's never shown up on a resume since, I got hired at Merrill Lynch as into their financial advisor training program, where I dedicated myself completely to learning what it was about, what I was doing, and then I developed enough experience to earn my way back to California where I wanted to be. So I figured it out and did what I needed to do to develop some kind of leverage so that I could get back. And then I negotiated my way back and moved to LA from there, jumped over to Morgan Stanley, which is another top firm. And if all goes according to plan, the last change that I'll make, I'm as happy as can be to work for such an incredible company. But that's how I navigated it. I mean, there is no easy answer. You make sacrifices. You do things that are scary and uncomfortable to make sure that you land in a position that you've earned and you've worked to get to. I knew I deserved a good job because I knew I worked hard in school, and I wasn't going to get that shot in, you know, more affected areas. So I went where there was opportunity. And I think when there's a challenging economic environment, you know, some industries may be struggling, but other industries are doing pretty well. And it's just about kind of not being rigid in what you thought you'd end up doing and understanding that there are opportunities out there. You just might have to get creative.
Thank you. So one of the topics that I've discussed previously with both of you is this idea of what success looks like right now when you're first graduating, what that feels like, what that looks like. Can you share some thoughts on the idea of success and breaking away from those thought processes that are, I should be successful and this is what it should look like? Sarah, do you want to start?
I love that question. I think it's a really important question to ask yourself ongoing as you go through life. Even every year, just sit down with yourself and define what success means to you right now. I think is a great exercise. And it for me, I'm successful by my own standards. Nobody is going to, in the business world or in the working world, hand you, fulfillment and meaning and purpose. And frankly, I'm a woman in a male-dominated industry. They're not going to hand me anything, right? Like there's nothing there. You have to define it for yourself. And I really like to set my goals and my vision of success as kind of starting with a feeling and working my way backwards rather than starting with like a number, right? It's easy for you to say like, oh, when I have $1 million, then I'll be happy. What does the world look like and what does $1 million really mean and what does it buy you at that time is so ambiguous that setting goals for me is there, do I have love in my life? Do I have what I need for my family and myself to be well? Do I make enough to sustain my overhead and maybe save a little bit? That to me is successful. If you are the most conventionally successful person in the world and you make zillions of dollars a year, but your overhead and your expenses are $1,000,001, you're miserable. You can't keep up. You're behind. You're underwater. But if you are, humble and you have what you need, and you're savvy about saving and you're financially healthy and the world turns upside down like it has right now and you're still able and capable, that to me is how I kind of think about success. I just started with how I want to feel, and I work backwards from there.
Deb?
Yeah, I'm thinking. I think a lot of success, even before you define success, you have to define your values, right? And Sarah touches on that. I too come from a family of immigrants. I'm the first generation born in this country. Both my parents come from poverty, right? And so they were actually the first movers in my family lineage to go to college and pursue education beyond middle school, actually. And so I think something that I really wrestled with when I first graduated from college, probably not a surprise, Asian background, not to say all Asian families are like this, but my parents were not too pleased about me going into the entertainment industry. And not only that, especially during a financial crisis where entertainment for that particular crisis was one of the first industries that was heavily impacted because people weren't spending on entertainment, right? So I had to really define for myself a different type of success away from my parents, away from family structures. And at that age, at least for me, I still really, and I still do, but I still really cared about my parents' opinions of me and like how they saw all this investment they put in me throughout my grade school, growing up years. And to them, it was perceived as being wasteful, right? And so I think having a really critical look at my values or looking at your values and also having a lot of support, right? Surrounding yourself with a community that may or may not align with what you've been brought up with and being able to differentiate that is important. My definition of success has changed over time. So when I first graduated, it was just getting into the entertainment industry. It's a very challenging industry to break into if you don't have the right connections. As I progressed, I realized that I was no longer happy marketing, DVDs of Rio and X-Men First Class, and I wanted to do something more meaningful. So my definition of success was helping students, and that's why I joined UCLA. Now at Stanford Medicine, I'm facilitating research funding for COVID, right? So now I reach a certain level of success in terms of having enough sway and leverage within my organization to make some really critical decisions, right? And so I think being nimble and being flexible with given your circumstances, but also honoring where you've come from and being very cognizant of how that also is pushing and pulling on how you're making decisions in the current state.
Great. So I want to ask both of you, what advice specifically do you have about concrete steps that you feel that students can take at this moment when looking for a job in this market? I know that we've talked a little bit about the kind of broad strokes of what you experienced, but is there any advice, especially too with the kind of way that technology has advanced, that you would be willing to share your thoughts on?
So everyone's going to be coming from a different stage of career when they enter the workforce, right? Like Sarah mentioned, some of you may not have had internships, right? Because you were working or you were doing other things that were important to sustain your life as a student, right? And so I think I've switched industries, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 times, right? So I've done entertainment, higher ed, tech. I worked for a startup very recently doing enterprise business development, and then now healthcare, right? And so that's going to seem really kind of a random mix to some folks, but the way that I've been able to pivot in between those industries is seeing the common skills and transferable skills, right? So when I was in college, I was very active in live events. I was very active in organizing, and so I was able to put some of those experiences on my resume. Make sure LinkedIn is updated, right? And also have very tangible, specific things that you've done in your previous projects and work, right? So having very broad strokes, descriptions of your responsibilities is not very helpful for a recruiter. They need to be able to see what you did, how you did it, and what the impact was in a very concise way. And I think that's something that I've really leveraged in terms of social media and technology for my own career.
Yeah, I think I touched a little bit on, just being flexible with what you thought you were going to end up doing with your major, and understanding that the world has changed. And, the industry that you may have dreamed of going into since you were 5 is just that, right? Now here you are 15 years later, and maybe that industry doesn't look the same, and may not be the same. So I think it's really, kind of goes back to that same idea of just being understanding and looking for areas of opportunity, because when certain industries are struggling, there are other industries that are hiring and in need, and they are out there and the work is there. It's just a matter of being creative with how you're applying those skills. I think to Deb's point, right, if you have various skill sets, you can apply them various ways. And so I think, kind of in goal setting, not getting attached to that outcome, that very specific thing you thought you were going to do, but rather kind of winding it back and figuring out, okay, if I have this basket of skills, I could probably apply them across various industries, and start kind of just throwing your name in the hat to many things that are doing well. I think something that I've been hearing a lot about from team leaders, people in position of hiring around me, just kind of in my local networks. I think what folks are looking for right now, it are your ability to represent the things about you that make you particularly human. I think that that's kind of an interesting concept right now, where technology and automation is taking over so many industries, that the ability to bring to the table certain characteristics, I guess, resilience, empathy, ability to connect with other people, communication skills, those types of things are not replaceable, and they're not necessarily taught in school, and they may not necessarily show up on the resume. But the things that make you uniquely you, creativity, I think those types of things that you can bring to the table make the difference between a strong candidate, in my view, and a weak one. You can't teach somebody to care deeply about the work they do, right? If you care deeply about the work you do, you should tell the person that you're trying to get a job with that you care deeply about the work you do. And it sounds kind of silly, but it is particularly human, and I think that that's really that's something that's really timely right now when you're applying.
Perfect. So I'd like to shift into more specific topics about saving and setting financial goals. So my first question is for both of you: what is the importance of thinking about saving for the future as a student that is about to graduate? This is kind of one of those hindsight is 2020 questions, but also some practical advice as well. Sarah, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. So the importance of saving for the future. It's critical to develop good savings habits early. It is critical to think about your future early, and it is a much larger burden on you to think about it later. Kind of like like bills, right? If you don't pay your bills, cool, you got more money in your pocket today. That's neat, but they're gonna find you, and you're gonna have to pay them, and they're gonna be bigger and uglier than they were before had you just dealt with them. So I think that savings is similar. It's one of those things that you cannot deal with it now. You could spend every penny that you earn, and watch your account balance go to zero every month. That's a fun game, but eventually it's going to catch up with you. And I think right now is evidence of that, right? I think last year we saw with the government shutdown that Americans really didn't have more than 1 month of savings in their pockets before they couldn't afford their medicine, before they couldn't afford their life. This COVID shutdown is another reminder of, folks don't have more than a month of living expenses in savings to sustain their lives. And those that do are fine right now financially. They're gonna weather the storm, and they know that. And that's the reason to do it, right? The reason to do it, the reason to save, is so that when things happen, you are resilient to them, and you are not upside down as a result. You are taking action in good times to ensure that in bad times you're in a better place. I in my line of work, I run a lot of 401k plans, which is the company's way of providing its employees with a vehicle to save towards retirement. So a lot of what I do is going out and educating people about what that means. Why should I save for retirement? What is a 401k? And, there are the conversations that I get to have with young folks that are like, oh, I know this one. You have to save into the 401k. My parents told me all along. They are in great shape. Things are going great. They know what they're good. The sad conversations come up when somebody's 50 years old and comes up to me and says, I never got around to starting to save. What would I have to do now to be on track? And the answer is a lot more of your own dollars that you are earning are going to have to support that retirement lifestyle, so you don't have to work when you're 80 or 90 years old. And everybody deserves that right to have a dignified old age where you're not forced to go back to work. And the difference in my mind is when you're young, it's, you pass on one bar tab per pay period and you put that in retirement instead, and you're styling. If you are 50 years old, it could be more like a car payment or a mortgage payment per pay period just to get yourself on track. So just like anything, if you don't deal with it now, fine, but it's going to be a much bigger burden later when you do have to deal with it. So I think it's critically important to just develop a savings plan early.
Yeah,
Deborah,
so
how about your experience? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh no, I mean, right, we're synced up. So when I graduated, my parents, I think I started with $700 that I made from tutoring. And my mom was like, that's enough, off you go, right? And so the understanding with me and my parents is that I'm very grateful they paid for my college education. So I came out with no student debt, right? And that's not the case for a lot of people. But the agreement was also, you're on your own from now on, right? There's no expectation that we'll come and save you if you're in a crunch. So, I'm happy to share my salary. So when I graduated, I started at $29K, right? Living in Los Angeles, had to buy a car, health insurance, right? And working for Disney in the orientation, I think more people were excited about the Disney Flash Pass or the Silver Pass more than the 401k conversation. But they were encouraging everyone to opt in because Disney did I think a 4% match at that point. Might have changed. And in my head, I was like, there's no way. Like with my rent and everything, there was just not a possibility for me to contribute to a 401k, right? But somehow I was able to very quickly save quite a bit, and I think I was actually overly frugal. My mother came and visited me, and she's like, "Deb, you need to buy spoons. Like, this is not a way to live, right?" And I think I lived with this constant kind of message from growing up with parents who grew up in poverty that you do not want to get into debt, right? To the best of your ability. Some, depending on your risk tolerance level, make some calculated choices. But I was actually really glad that I was so strict with myself when I saved a good emergency fund, because I was laid off twice during the financial crisis. And that funding, although I got unemployment, that was what allowed me to still be independent and not have to rely on my parents because I couldn't, right? And so that was a good lesson to learn really early on for me in terms of how do you manage money, how little you can really live off on if you really tried, while still maintaining a somewhat healthy lifestyle.
If I could just follow up on that, I think Deb makes a really great point, and there's definitely a distinction between your short-term rainy day savings and your future long-term retirement savings. Both are really important, and one should not come at the expense of the other. So what I mean by that is, a savings goal is important to have, but that short-term retirement savings are designed so that you can't touch them until retirement. You shouldn't touch them until retirement. It's designed for age 59 and a half and above. So you're not touching it for 40 years. A lot can happen in 40 years, right? You can be laid off twice. You could be laid off 10 times. And the thing that makes you resilient to those life events is a rainy day fund. Your car could break down and you can't get to work. Now you have to get a car. Those short-term savings are as important, if not more important, than those long-term savings. And so I could give some kind of like general guidelines on what you might want to aim for, but at the end of the day, it may not be realistic, right? You may be making 29,000 living in LA and just rubbing two sticks together trying to get through the whole thing. But when you can start thinking about savings, I think it's good to have targets of just something that you can kind of aim towards, so that when things do start kind of becoming a little bit, when you start having a little bit more by way of resources, you don't bloat into them, right? You know that you had a savings goal that you never really took care of because you had to be so stringent with your money. But now you just got a raise. Well, I could just, go get a bigger apartment, or I haven't really met that obligation towards savings yet. So maybe I shouldn't bloat into that with my day-to-day expenses, and I should kind of make the decisions according to that target savings goal. And you have to have those two buckets, one long-term, one short-term. both really important.
So both of you mentioned 401ks. Sarah, what is a 401k? How is it maybe different than other savings, retirement savings plans?
Good question. So a 401k is an employer-sponsored retirement plan, which means your company that hires you on is giving you a vehicle that you can save towards retirement in. It is an investments account, so you're putting money in. Essentially, the money is deducted from your paycheck before it goes through taxes and all the other things. This would be your traditional 401k. There's also a Roth 401k, which is a fancy word for after taxes. But traditionally, it is pre-taxed money that you're able to put away into a retirement savings account, within which you're able to invest into the stock market, any number of investments that are picked out for you and listed for you. So that's going to be your first go at investing. The things to know about a 401k plan: number one, that money is yours. It is not your employer's. So if you save towards it and then you leave that job, that money comes with you through life, and take it with you through life. Don't leave it lying around and forget that you were saving towards a retirement plan. Too many people do that, and it's really important to keep your money with you as you go through life. So you could, it's really your only portable benefit. When you leave the company, you're not allowed to take the health insurance with you when you go. You're not allowed to take the pencils when you go. You'll probably get in trouble. But your 401k money is always yours. Because it's tax advantaged, right? You put money in pre-tax. That's the 401k part. So 401k is just a tax code 401k. You put money in pre-tax. It grows throughout your life. You're not paying taxes on it. And then when it comes out in retirement, that's when you're paying taxes on the money. So it grew that whole time. You funded your retirement, and at retirement, you start to pull the money out. After age essentially 59 and a half, you're allowed to start. Prior to that, if you touch the money, taxes, penalties, all kinds of things that you don't want would apply. So that's the basics of what a 401k is. A Roth 401k, again, is just an after-tax version of the same thing. It runs through taxes, and then it goes into this retirement account for you. Now, the reason you would want to save for a 401k, and the reason it matters, is because most of us, I would imagine, myself certainly included, does not want to rely on the government to fund my retirement. The average Social Security check today is about $1,100 a month. Is that going to be enough for you to sustain your retirement lifestyle, including medical expenses? Probably not. You might, so privately funding your retirement is really the only option that makes that a comfortable outcome. And the best, most tax efficient vehicle to do so is a 401k. Oftentimes, employers, Deb mentioned, will offer a match in a 401k, which means free money. That means your boss is saying, retirement is important. I really want you to save for it because you should. And in order to sweeten the deal for you, I'm going to give you some percentage. I'm going to match the money that you put in up to some percentage of your income. And every plan is different. Every match is different. There may not be a match at all. There is still reason to save, even if there isn't a match. But if there is one, that's basically your boss giving you a 4% raise inside of a retirement account. So meet them there. Try not to leave free money on the table, because who doesn't like free money? The match, I'd say, if there is a match offered, that's a good starting point. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that dollar amount is going to get you to retirement successfully. So let's say you wanted to get the full match. You're working at Disney, they offered 4%. In Deb's example, you say, cool, I want the 4% raise and the free money. I don't want to leave that on the table. So I'm going to set my contributions to 4% of my income every month to retirement. That 4%, if you leave that in place for the next 40 years, may not be enough to get you to retirement. So The national averages and studies say 10 to 15% is a pretty good target, but that's a lot when you're starting out. So a little trick that I like to suggest is start with the match if you can afford it. Again, not at the expense of your short-term savings. You have to save towards both, at least in some part. But start with the match as kind of the first milestone. And then every year, set a little calendar reminder to increase it by 1%. I promise you, if taxes went up by 1%, you probably wouldn't notice it on your paychecks, but it'll make a really big difference in your retirement savings over time. And so you do that every year until you get to 10 or 15%. And all of a sudden, it was a smooth ramp there. You didn't really notice your paychecks declining. And they're really not declining, right? You're giving that money to your future self. You're paying yourself later. That is your money. So that's a good little tip and trick for the 401k and how to think about it.
Yeah, and I just want to add also, since I've worked in a nonprofit as well, so the 401k could be called a 403b.
Yep.
It's basically the same thing, right? And they have the same sort of structures, as well as maybe less so in the early part of your career, but maybe later on you have to be mindful of also the max amount that you can contribute. But I didn't start contributing to retirement until I joined UCLA, and that's a completely different structure where they also have a pension contribution, right? So a lot of it is learning on your own, asking lots of questions from your HR professionals, asking friends, family, or peers who are also making these types of decisions.
Perfect. So we talked about saving as a financial goal, but there are a lot of different kinds of financial goals. It might be a trip or buying a car or saving for a down payment on property. What was your first financial goal, and do you think that was the right choice? And Deb, I want to start with you.
I think my first financial goal was to not get in debt. That's really, that was really the main thing in 2008. And I have been successful in that, but everyone has to take into account how much they're willing to risk, right? So there were opportunities where I got into grad school. There was once, and I realized after making the calculation that I'd be about $200,000 in debt after going to this grad school program, even with the scholarship they offered me. For me, that number just seemed too scary, right? To another person, that could be totally worth it, and it could yield gains because of that career jump that ends up paying that off really quickly. But where I was emotionally and psychologically, I just wasn't ready to make that kind of commitment. And then over time, that's changed. Something that making six figures was a huge goal of mine when I was in my early 20s. I was like, I'm going to make six figures by the time I turn 30. That did not happen, right? And, but I think I had enough time in my 20s as my 30-year mark was coming that I was like, I'm actually pretty happy where I am, right? And so I think getting more experience really gave my original goal some context as to what that really means.
Yeah, I mean, my story is a little different. So my first financial goal was to get out of debt. I was in it. It was, the decision to go to college put me in debt. And that was just understood. Which is why I was so determined when I graduated that I moved myself to a place where I knew no one and had no real reason to move to other than to try to get a hold of the bet that I had taken on myself. I'm still in debt, and my husband has college debt. So we're just going to have this combined little ugly baby of student debt forever. And that's okay. But at the end of the day, I think that for me, it's a goal. It will continue to be a goal, but it's it's about having control over your finances. It's about keeping my overhead low enough relative to the income that I'm making so that I can fulfill my debt obligations, right? I don't need to pay off all of my student loans at once. And while the bill looks really big and scary, I know really successful doctors that have hundreds of thousands of dollars of student debt and are very successful people, got themselves a mortgage, have cars, have kids, have everything they need, and are just kind of chipping away over time at that student loan bill. And I think that's okay. But I think it's really just important to stay on top of it. You know, I communicated with the student loan companies. I studied the debt. I figured out what was the highest interest debt that I could pay off first. Maybe there was an opportunity to refinance some of it here and there. You know, and right at the beginning, if I couldn't pay it, I didn't just not pay it, right? I called them and I said, hey, I can't pay it. And there's options for that. There's ways that they can help you with that. There are ways to, you know, if you don't have a job, you can't pay the student loan bill. But if you communicate that to the student loan company, there are ways to manage that that aren't just hiding under a rock and waiting for it to get worse. There are, you know, income-based repayment plans that are around your particular income and a percentage of that, and will only increase should your income increase, which is pretty fair. There's a lot of ways around it. So I think if you just take hold of it, even though I haven't paid it off, I don't feel like I'm under it or that it is controlling me in some way. I'm very much in control of that debt. I very much know what my balance sheet looks like. I know what my budget is, and I know what my time frame is for paying it off, and I'm very comfortable with it. And I actually think I could probably buy a house before I pay off my student loans, and that's okay. It's really just about understanding what it is and making sure that you're in control of it. And so for me, that financial independence, that was always my goal. That was always my only goal, was just to take care of myself, take care of my bills, and make sure that I'm not outspending what I'm earning. And that if something did happen and I wasn't able to fulfill something, I was handling it responsibly, and not running from it.
Great. So you spoke a little bit about managing debt as a student. Do you have any specific thoughts around that? Any advice on, you know, what should you do with your student loans if you have these loans? You can say,
Yeah.
you know, I've already answered this question. That's fine too.
Yeah, no, it touched on it briefly, but just quick bullet points would be, communicate with these student loan. First of all, identify these student loan providers, because a few of them snuck up on me after graduation. You push a radio button, you don't really know what you're signing. You're just kind of trying to get through each quarter, subsidized, unsubsidized. Frankly, I didn't really understand what was going to come back at me and what was a grant and what was a loan. So making sure that you actually have a full understanding of what your student loans are. And if you don't, they'll probably find you. So rest assured, you'll hear from them. But identifying what they are, step one. Step two, you know, call them. What does the bill look like? When is it due? Don't be late on payments ever if you can do absolutely anything about it. And as your last resort, again, call them and tell them that you're not able to make your payments before you just are late, because all of those late, delinquent, those types of things can really hurt your credit score, and that sticks with you, and that makes you look like you're not responsible or not worth lending to, and that could hurt you in other ways. So I think when it comes to student loans, make sure you identify what they are, make sure you call that company that is facilitating the loan, and understand your options. What are all my repayment options? Okay, well, maybe there's one called this fancy word that I don't understand, that fancy word that I don't understand, and something about income. Explain it to me, right? Ask them to explain to you what those words mean. Don't just be overwhelmed by the nuances of how complicated it sounds, those folks on the other end of the phone have to explain it to you until you understand, as long as you're asking the questions. So make sure you really understand what your options are, figure out the best repayment plan for you, and don't make late payments. Pay your bills on time. If it means setting up an auto payment, set up an auto payment. But that level of responsibility and ownership on your bills is adulthood. Like that's the thing about bills. There's always another bill. Even people who have all the money in the world have bills from people who handle their bills. Like there are always going to be more bills. So just get a handle on them. Understand your options. And if circumstances change, call that company back and say, circumstances have changed. My income has changed. I don't have a job anymore. I'm not able to make the payment. What are my options? The what are my options question will always be, should always be the thing you do before you give up. Like, just make sure that if you're not able to do something, you're finding out what your options are. You're picking the best path forward. I think that where people go wrong with taxes too, taxes are overwhelming. They're scary. They come due every year. Maybe I just won't deal with them. It doesn't get better. It only gets worse. So, if you can't pay your taxes, the question is, what are my options, right? You call, you say, hey, IRS, what are my options? They'll say, oh, there's 20 repayment plans. We could stretch this over 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. What do you need? There are options. You just have to ask the question. So I think those would be my tips. If you can, pay off high interest loans first, but you still have to make the minimum payments on all of them, right? You can't just pay off one and hope it counts for the rest. Refinancing is sort of a question. It's out there. It's an option. I don't think it's a bad option, right? If you're paying 14% for a student loan and somebody's offering you a 3% loan, that could be a pretty big savings for you. So refinancing could be an option. Be careful with your credit score. If you throw too many applications out there to refinance, that could ding your credit score. A good way to monitor, there's all kinds of ways. I use Credit Karma. I think it's a pretty easy, free way to just kind of keep an eye on things, just to make sure something's not going crazy. So if you don't know what your credit score is, and you've just graduated college, surprise, you have one, and it's out there. So get the free information, figure out where you kind of stand. And if there's some delinquencies in there, you're going to want to take care of your credit health. That's going to be an important component of life. So refinancing is a little bit more complicated. You can, or you don't have to. There really is no right answer as long as you're paying your bills on time.
Great. So I want to shift to talking about job offers at the moment, because this is something that I think comes up for a lot of us as we progress throughout our career. Is what do we look like what do we look for when we get an offer? What is the wiggle room? How do I negotiate? So I'd like to ask you, Deborah, if you'd like to start, what has your experience been when signing a job offer? And what do you look for in a job offer? What do you consider? And when is it okay to negotiate?
So I want to caveat that I'm still learning how to do this, right? And I negotiate for a living. I started negotiating job offers and packages way too late. So I was probably closer to 30 when I really, the fire was burning, I was ready to go. And also, the negotiation stage, to clarify, does not start when you get the offer, right? So part of negotiation piece is when you're learning about the job, you're learning about the company or the organization. You're collecting those nuggets, and make sure you're recording these things as you're going through the process, because this will all come up when you're finally negotiating that offer. So as of the last year, I've actually negotiated 2 job offers. One when I was joining the startup in tech, and then my offer for Stanford Medicine. In both situations, there was no official offer. The official offer was only given to me once we finished the verbal negotiations. So I would say that when you're looking at a job offer or looking at a job, make sure you're asking, I mean, to Sarah's point about the savings and finances piece, asking good questions, right? This will all help you make a decision. And yes, you're going to look at pay, right? But also look at I always say, look at the full benefits package, right? Do your calculations. How much is the health insurance, right? Take into account, they've got a great retirement package. Do they have other benefits? And sometimes if they don't list them, ask. For me, huge value of mine is lifetime learning. So I asked about what are professional development benefits, right? I'll give an example of my current job. So they offer $800 a year for learning and development. They came in lower than I wanted for the salary. So, you know, be flexible, but also know your options. So what I said to them is, I know that you have this program that only offers $800 a year, and I really want to be beefing up this skill set that would help this team move forward in this way. Okay, if you're not able to meet me at this base salary, and this, you know, they told me this is our maximum, how about an additional this much money from a different pot for my learning and development, right? And that's actually worked for me in the past. So I was able to get, even though it wasn't a direct salary piece, I was able to ask the right questions to basically show to the employer I was looking at the whole piece of the pie, not just the one data point. And also I had already thought ahead of ways to do it, right? And so ultimately, actually for this particular negotiation, they couldn't increase my learning and development budget that I so creatively proposed, but they actually increased my base salary. So there was actually money in the pot, but they had to be able to go to their higher ups and say, we need to get DAB this. So we're giving you the learning and development funding by actually going back to the base, which is what I originally wanted anyway, right? And so always negotiate, but be prepared, ask good questions, know where they're coming from as well, and be collaborative in the negotiation process. This is not a me versus you. These are your future potential colleagues, right? And so you want to make sure you maintain that goodwill and show a level of flexibility and nimbleness.
I think that was really well said. I don't have a ton to offer on negotiations because I did it once, and now I'm here. And I did negotiate around, you know, I think in my experience, there's a lot to be said about understanding the value you bring to the table, and being humble enough to know when you don't bring value yet. You know, if you're just starting out and you walk into the room like you know everything and that you have all the value in the world to offer, you're going to get a couple of eyeballs rolling into the back of their head saying, kid, you don't know. You got to get out there, you got to work, you got to cut your teeth on some positions that I think may not feel like you're making what you want, or may not feel exactly perfect, or whatever, on the road to establishing value. And I think that it's important then, once you know you bring value to a team, once you know you bring value to a position, once you know that, you know, I'm a valuable member, I know what I'm talking about, I can walk into the room, you turn me upside down, and the fact is I know my stuff, then you do your research, right? Then you figure out, all right, well, if there's other people out there in the field that know their stuff and are recognized as knowing their stuff, what are they getting paid? How are they getting compensated? What are competing firms paying their people? Whether it's in hard dollars or benefits or, you know, lifestyle. Maybe you don't need the extra $10,000 a year of salary, but you want another 3 weeks of vacation. I don't know. It could be anything. But I think it's fair to, once you have value, then in your either performance reviews or you call a meeting yourself and you say, you know, here is how I know I've established value. And I want to open a conversation around being incentivized accordingly to what I think that value is that I bring to the table. And I think those conversations are pretty hard for an employer to ignore. You know, if you're demonstrating that you've done good work, you're going above and beyond what, and you know what the competitive landscape is for that position and for that value, I think that you have a leg to stand on to negotiate. But I do think that there is an element of being humble when you don't have the work experience, and know that, you know, it may not be everything that you want, but it's a shot. And sometimes you just got to kind of take the shot, prove yourself, work hard, and then establish that value. And then defend that value, right? Like, there's always going to be people trying to pat you on the head and saying, oh, you're young and I'm old, so you don't have value. And I never really accepted that. I was always a pretty big advocate for myself and defending the value that I bring once I knew I brought some. I think there was a question directed at my last answer. It was, what is refinance? I'll touch on that real quick. So refinancing is taking a loan that has a high interest rate associated with it and going through a process with another loan company, or maybe the same loan company, that is for a new loan with a lower interest rate. The things that they would look at to give you that would be things like your credit score, and you have to be careful with how many times you kind of go back and forth trying to get something like that accomplished, because again, if you haven't established your value, then it's hard to get those types of big discounts applied. So it's something that maybe comes a little bit later down the road once you have kind of an established income, your credit score is kind of stronger, you're a little bit more on your feet. Typically you're a little bit more capable of refinancing, but you could explore the landscape of taking a loan that's higher interest rate and seeing if you'll start getting peppered with mail. Trust me, if you have student loans, they're going to send you all kinds of mail saying you're pre-qualified for this new loan at this new rate. There's going to be no shortage of that mail. Don't apply to all of them. Do your research, make sure that that's what you want to go through with and do, and that it actually helps you. Right? If you're not able to pay loan 1, you're not going to be able to pay loan 2. So work with your current lender and get yourself kind of on your feet. But refinancing is quite simply just taking a high interest loan and getting yourself a lower interest loan.
Great. So we're approaching time. So I want to just kind of wrap it up with look at this question that's directed for you, Sarah, but also Deborah, if you'd like to jump in. What are some basic financial principles or rules of thumb for managing finances, especially when you're on an entry-level budget?
Yep. Entry-level budget. Step 1, create a budget. But seriously, create a budget. Write it down on a piece of paper, put it on an Excel spreadsheet, or there's a great app called Mint that makes it pretty easy to track your expenses. Just know where you're spending money, know what bills you have, keep on top of your bills. Step 1. So just create the budget, know your budget, and it would be probably wise for your budget to jive with your income level, right? You can have a pretty ambitious budget, but if your income doesn't cover it, you've got a problem. So create a budget relative to your income, make sure you're including all of your bills. And if your parents are helping you, pay your bills, and mom and dad are paying your cell phone and your car insurance, and they're not saying anything, so you're not saying anything, that's cool, but that's still a bill. Know what it is and know that you're getting that gift of not paying it. Build it into your budget, but put it in savings, right? You're being given a head start in life that many people don't get. So know what those bills are, because at any point your parents can flip the switch. You're responsible for that bills, and now your budget is backwards. So take into account what it costs to live life, and create a robust budget around that. And then you'll kind of understand your own needs better. Mint is great too, because it helps track digitally all of your expenses. So you'll know, oh man, I ate out, $5,000 last month. That's a lot. How did I do that? I blew my whole budget on eating out. You have to try to spend that much. So just know where you're spending your money. That's rule of thumb 1. Rule of thumb 2, I'll just give a general savings target. This is just going to be a really loose blanket statement. You get a job, right? They say, here's your starting salary. It's $40,000 a year. Cool. What does that mean? You're not actually taking home $40,000 a year. You're paying taxes, you're saving, and you're paying your bills. So when you're thinking about what that number is, just understand that that full number is not your take-home pay. Your paycheck is not going to reflect that full 40,000. So think loosely when you're just starting out. About 30% is probably going to taxes. About 20% should be your savings target, and that's again between your short-term and long-term savings. And so that leaves you with half of what that number is what you have to live on. So budget around that. That should be the target. Now, not everyone can save 20% of what they earn off the bat. So maybe it's 70% that you're able to live on, but taxes are non-negotiable. So 70% to 50% of that starting number is what you're taking home. The goal should be to live on about half of what you're making. That way you can afford to save. Rule number 3, now that you've decided that 20% is the target goal for savings, split that between short-term and long-term, because you don't want to sacrifice one for the other, right? Maybe early on in your career, it'll be, let me just get the company match, call it 3, 4, 5%, whatever. We'll call it 5% round numbers. I'm going to get the company match at 5%. So I'm going to match 5. That means that if my total savings goal is 20%, I'm saving 5 towards the long term. I should be putting away 15% into just short-term savings account for my rainy day fund. Once that rainy day fund builds up to an amount that is comfortable, then you could start to tilt the scale back less towards your rainy day fund and more towards your long-term savings, still saving that total 20%. So maybe after 10 years of that, more towards short-term, less towards long-term, you start to shift towards maybe half to each, or much more towards your long-term savings because you're really comfortable with short-term. People typically get comfortable with their short-term savings amount. It's different for everyone. But the way you want to think about the comfortable goal in your short-term savings is months of living expenses. And the only way to find that out is looking at your budget that you created. So how many months can I survive if I lost my job today without work? And how long would it take me to replace my income and go find another job? For some people that are really confident in their abilities to go and replace their work, maybe it's 3 months pay, or 3 months of living expenses. For other people, maybe it's 6 months, 9 months, maybe it's a year of living expenses that you just want in savings so that if something happened, you're resilient to it. That number, we call it kind of like the sleep at night number. Whatever that number is for you, it's going to be different for everyone. But creating that savings goal, I think, is really important. And don't get down on yourself if you can't get there right off the bat. It's good to have a target. It's good to know that you're aiming for something. So I think that's all. Yeah.
I just have one thing to add. I think that accountability with tracking and apps, and there's tons of tools out there, but also if you, for those of you who are partnered up, right? Like my partner and I sit down once a month and look down at our expenses and just, okay, what do we need to cut back on? What are the things that we need to invest in the next month? Let's say we need to buy a new piece of furniture or something that, so having that open dialogue and not to make assumptions about where the money is going. Sometimes I think, especially for me and being in a couple, I will just assume that the other person just knows, and then I just sort of kind of not lose, but maybe put aside the need to be on top of things, right? And so just making sure that you're tracking, especially during these times, right? Speaking of unemployment, the average time it takes for a person to find a job, according to kind of different metrics, is 6 weeks, but that's usually retail, right? If it's like certain other jobs, 3 months. During the financial crisis, it was not uncommon for my friends to take 6 months to a year to find a job, right? So making sure that you're also stretching it out that timeline that you might need for the emergency savings that go beyond what the current nodes or little nuggets of wisdom that are out there.
Great. Well, I want to thank you both for your time tonight. I feel like every time I speak to our alumni, I learn something new, something important, and this is absolutely no exception. So thank you both. Sarah, I know that you had said to the students at the beginning that if they had any questions that they could look for you to ask questions to. So I would encourage you to look for both Sarah and Deborah on LinkedIn. It's a really great tool. It's a good practice, especially when you have alumni inviting you to connect with them. I would encourage you to use the messaging feature if you are going to connect with them on LinkedIn, just to let them know how you know about them. So it's not just some random person saying, "Hey, give me advice." But this has been amazing, and I want to thank you both again, and I hope you have a lovely night, and good night to all the students as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Take care.